Welcome to video 3 in our series for the Kentucky Academic Standards for Reading and Writing. In this video, we are going to focus on view number 3 of the standards, the breakdown view, and multidimensionality, a new embedded portion of the standards that I have to say in my work so far in the training since July 1, the breakdown view and multidimensionality have been the hit, so to say. The feedback we get is just phenomenal about how this breakdown view, which includes the multidimensionality, has clarified instruction for teachers. So let's just delve right in. Our learning goal, we actually have two in this video, and the first one is to help you understand the organizational and architectural structure of the breakdown view. But once we understand that, how can it be used to help us develop and provide appropriate student work based on the revised standards? In other words, we're going to take a minute and give you access to where you can look at the analysis of teacher assignments aligned to the standards. This breakdown view, I like to call it the teacher's best friend, and as I said just a few minutes ago, teachers are agreeing with me. Let's take just a moment and let's look at this slide. This is the breakdown view. This is what you will see in your specific grade level standards. What you are looking at is a 5th grade standard. Standard number 1, it's reading, informational, 5th grade, standard 1. And you're seeing that in the progression right in the middle. But let's back up. Let's look at the guiding principle. As you notice, it has a graduation cap because it's a reminder to us this is the goal by graduation. And it's always at the top to remind you why what you are doing is so important. And in the second level, we have the progression. And what you're seeing is a mini progression, because the standard as a 5th grade teacher is in the middle. But on the left is the 4th grade standard that students should come to you knowing and being able to do. That's the intent. And then on the right side, you have the 6th grade standard. I know all of you, and from my teaching experience and Rebecca's too, you do have those kids in your classroom who you can allow to go farther. And right here on the page, without you having to go to the 6th grade standards, is some guidelines for you of how you can support those students and where they should be going. The bottom part, multidimensionality, I'm going to come back to in just one second. I want us to focus on the progression for just a moment. Number 1, when I look at progression, first of all, if I'm the 5th grade teacher, especially when I'm first getting ready to start to teach this standard, I really need to know what my students already know. And so right there on the page are some guidelines to help me determine how I can create a formative assessment that allows me to see where the majority of my kids are. And I always, the example I always used to use for the Common Core standards, the words who, what, when, where, and why were not actually in the standard until 2nd grade. You can't teach kindergarten without saying who, what, when, where, and why. So formative assessment probably would show a 2nd grade teacher that kids still are struggling with why and how. So we don't beat a dead horse to death. If they already know the other 3, let's focus my instruction in getting them to the next level. And before, we had to go to that big document that had K through 12 on it, as we showed you earlier. Now you have it right here in front of you. The next thing that has become very evident in the trainings that we have been doing refers to the standard itself. And when we look across and we look at just the first few words at 4th, 5th, and 6th, we see refer to details and examples. Then 5th grade wants us to have them quote them accurately. And then 6th grade, we have to cite it. And that always comes up in a conversation about that's basically doing the same thing. Yes, it is. And that's why that is not the depth of the standard. And why with our so many teachers struggled in the Common Core standards because they were so broad that it was kind of difficult to decide where the focus should be. Well, the rest of the standard, when you get to analysis, is the important part of the standard itself. And sometimes we didn't take kids there. So in answer to that, the writers, and Rebecca's going to give us lots more insight. I'm giving you the overview of it. We went into multidimensionality of the standard. This is to help teachers. And immediately, the teachers that I have been working with saw this as a way to, the standards already deconstructed for them, so they can begin with learning targets. Yes. So let's take just a minute and let me give you your first introduction to multidimensionality. As you can see, the legend there shows if the word is in green or italic, and I love the fact they realized not all schools would have colored printers to copy these for teachers. So if it's green or in italic, that is the comprehension part of the standard. If it's purple or bold, it's the analysis part of the standard. If it's maroon and in caps, that's the content. So when we're looking at this, and I'm going back to the quote accurately part, quote accurately from a text is content. It's not the ultimate goal of what students should know and be able to do in this standard, but it is something that a teacher needs to provide instruction for. So that's going to be a learning target, and how you do that, again, is at the discretion of the teacher being the prescriber and designing the appropriate grade level tasks for that. The comprehension part of that standard, we begin to get a little more difficult, explaining what the text says explicitly. And again, you have to teach kids and help them understand the answer is there, even if it's inferenced, which is the next part of the question, the standard when drawing inferences. That is the analysis part. That is what we want kids to know and be able to do. And Jennifer Carroll was in attendance and did part of the presentation in our trainings. And when we were working with high school teachers, it especially came up about learning targets. And what I just described to you was what we always called unpacking the standard. But at some point, in true fashion, to master the standard, you have to pack that standard back up. Yes. And your instruction has to reflect the whole standard. And we are going to give you, in a little bit, we're going to give you some resources to help you understand that and get you started. Every training we've done, teachers have responded very positively to this and how much it helps them, especially in comparison to the big and broad Common Core standards. I do want to point out that if you want more information about guiding principles, it is located on page 13. But the bottom line is, in a busy day, you are going to stay right in the middle of what you're seeing in this breakdown view, right in the middle to get the progression and the multidimensionality. Why multiple dimensions?
Okay, so the previous standards document we felt like didn't focus on a dimensional approach, and the perceived depth of a standard may have been limited to comprehension due to the interpretation or deconstruction. So like Carol alluded to on the last slide, what happened often is teachers unpacked that standard, and I may teach a student to quote accurately from the text, and then I may have them explain what it says, but I never had them use that with inferencing intentionally in the way that would show that they are reaching the intended depth of the standard. And so in the new Kentucky Academic Standards for Reading and Writing, the reading, composition, and language standards have multiple dimensions or layers. And so we were very intentional in pulling those out and color coding them, because we wanted teachers to understand that in order to get to the intended depth and rigor, you have to look at those dimensions separately in order to help students be able to do them together at a deep, rigorous level. So it's an important concept, the multidimensionality. So what are these dimensions? We chose to highlight content, comprehension, and analysis. And if you're thinking about how we approach instruction in general, the first step in any lesson is to give the students the foundational knowledge that they're going to need in order to approach whatever task that you set for them. And so the skills and content provide the what to help students access that concrete and abstract thinking that's needed to practice the doing of the reading and the composing within the discipline. So if I'm looking at a standard that is broken down, and okay, before I move on to looking at an individual standard, no, go back to that one, I'm sorry. So when this is another look at the multidimensionality piece, and it's from pages 15 and 16, and really it's what I just said, but it's broken down for you so that you can look at it more intentionally. Perhaps if you need clarification when you're talking about content, the examples there I think are helpful for teachers. That central idea, theme, tone, structure, syntax, those things are things that's content for a reading and writing teacher. Students have to understand the content first. They have to know what it is before they can do anything with it. And then comprehension is actually decoding language and words in context. If I know I'll talk about that in a minute, but being able to effectively summarize or retell what they've read, knowing the grammar rule, that's comprehension, right? I'm going to teach you the grammar rule one day. Maybe I'm going to tell you that if you have a dependent clause that comes before an independent clause in a sentence, that the comma comes after the dependent clause and before the independent clause. That's the content. That's the rule. But if you comprehend that rule, then you're going to be able to look at any sentence anywhere that is constructed with that way, and you're going to be able to apply that grammar rule because you comprehend it, you understand it, you know it. Okay? Then, if you can do that, if you can comprehend that grammar rule, that gives you the ability then to move toward analysis. That's where you're able to look at it and you're able to say, in Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream, why did he repeat this complex sentence structure multiple times in paragraph 6? Right? Why did he do that? What was his intention? Because we know writers do things intentionally. And so you teach students to take what they know and to analyze rhetoric, and it gives them a deeper understanding, and they're functioning at a much more rigorous level. So they have to have all three parts of that standard, and they have to be able then to pull it all together to get to rigor.
I agree. And one of the things that came up a lot in the trainings we've done, when you're looking at the bottom of the screen, this example of a standard, immediately the bold purple jumps out at you. Determine and analyze their development. That's the highest level of the standard. So we know where we're taking kids. And it came up, for example, in a training I was doing about sixth grade, has some, one of the standards mentions MLA and
APA, maybe?
APA. Right. And it's like, is there going to be a question on the test that will ask my students to define between those two? Because before, our standards weren't broken apart. And I said, let's look at your standard. No, that was a part of the content to be taught. The actual writing of that particular standard was the purple and bold, that is where we put it all back together, and that is the intent of what a student should be able to know and do by the time they leave that grade level. So like I said, the multidimensionality, I want to just really hope that your school or your district or you yourself go back and learn all you can about it. Like Rebecca said, pages 15 and 16 in the actual standards document does have some information directly there, but it's all through the standards.
So if you look at the standard, to be more specific, if we start with the way that I think about it is I start with content, because you have to give foundational knowledge first. So if I'm going to teach my students this standard, determine central ideas of a text and analyze their development through citing textual evidence, paraphrasing, or summarizing, that's a pretty big chunk for a student to do. Am I going to teach that all in one day in one lesson? No way. There's no rational person who's going to look at that and say, okay, I got this, we're going to do this all today. I'm going to be intentional in my instruction, and I'm going to scaffold it so that students at the end of that instruction will be able to pull it all together, and they'll be able to do those things well. So I'm going to start with, what is a central idea? What do I mean when I say determine the central idea? What do I mean? And how do I do that? I'm going to give the foundational knowledge, right? That may be a learning target, right? How do you determine the central idea of a text? Then I'm going to go to comprehension. Now, here's the thing. Comprehension, first of all, they have to understand what central idea is. They have to have comprehended that foundational knowledge. Then they're going to have to read and comprehend the text in order to cite, paraphrase, or summarize effectively, right? They're going to have to be able to read intentionally and to pull information from what they have read in order to figure out what they need to cite, paraphrase, or summarize. They can't pull that information out if they haven't already been able to determine what is central idea. I can't prove it if I don't know what I'm trying to work toward. And then the final thing is analysis. Okay, when I want students to think abstractly to determine the central ideas and analyze their development, that depends on them first being able to understand what the central idea is, what is the process for determining a central idea, and them being able to read and comprehend and pull an inference from a text in order then to move to that much higher level thinking of analysis. And so eventually I'm going to, if I am going to prove that my students can meet the challenge of this standard, then I'm going to have to give them a task that asks them to pull all of this together. They're going to have to be able to do all three parts of that standard in order for me to know that I have taught that standard. just picking apart and saying this is the central idea, giving them a vocab term or something, does not meet the depth and rigor that's intended in this standard.
Absolutely. And one thing that always comes up in any training that I'm conducting, especially about the composition and the writing that students must do. This, and I'm always asked about on-demand writing also. This has clarified for teachers where to take your writing. And having a text-based, students are reading, and then we're looking at the standard of how we want to, as you always say, writing is their learning visible. And this has proven, I've heard so many good table discussions among teachers about how this is clarifying. In one training I was doing, I had a teacher, now that I know this, I wish I could go back and start the year over for what I've already taught. Because it does give clarification, and that's so important.
And I think those standards, when you look at standards like that, it just emphasizes again that relationship between reading and writing.
Absolutely.
Writing is a perfect assessment tool for reading.
Right. And one of the key features that is pulled out within those pages of descriptions and further information on multidimensionality is how this supports teachers in the process of designing a standard aligned lesson or task for kids, grade level appropriate assignments. And one thing I want to say to you, those of you who are watching or listening, you have to remember that whether it's a fifth grader, eighth grader, their assessment will be at fifth grade and eighth grade levels. So we have to ensure that at some point, yes, we scaffolded the learning and we do meet kids where they are, but as alluded to in the very first video we did with the opportunity myth, we have to give all kids the opportunity to participate in grade level appropriate assignments. So that being said, we're going to give you some resources that you can go to help you get started on your journey in understanding what this looks like. You know, we're giving you a video and we're giving you some slides, but what does that really look like in the classroom? So one of the things that we have done in our trainings is it's called a discovery task using multidimensionality to check for standards alignment. And the instructions are right there, but where do you go to get the materials and resources to complete this discovery task? Well, KDE has provided us four different ones, and the next slide will show you where to get them and the supporting information that goes along with it. But here is what you will be doing when you look once you access these. You're going to, I'm jumping on down to number 2, you're going to carefully review a sample task that is given to you and determine to what degree it's aligned to the standard. Is it weakly aligned, partially aligned, or strongly aligned? And then in the participation guide itself, you can jot down notes for that. And then you make a decision. Then we have a facilitator's guide that will let you see whether you were right or wrong. And then you have an example of another at this particular grade level. So I'm going to go ahead and put this up. We have a second grade assignment, the 2 tasks, bear and turtle and wind and water. 5th grade, it's Frindle, and I know several teachers in the training say, oh, I use Frindle in my classroom. And then a whale hunting piece of text. And then for 8th grade, we have one piece of text, and it is a poem, but there are 2 different tasks, teacher-written tasks, to an athlete dying young. And then for 11th and 12th grade, that's been made available, a raisin in the sun and The Devil and Tom Walker. So I do want to urge you to take a look at these, because in the supporting information, you're going to have those 2 tasks. You're going to have the standards identified that the assignment should be aligned to at whatever of the 3 levels, and then you will have the rationale of why it is or isn't strong, weak, or partially. So I do want to encourage you to do that. So the last thing I want to leave you with, KDE provided these 4 examples, and the 4 examples came from this website, which is also where the opportunity myth is housed. It's the TNTP website. There is a student work library, and within that student work library, there are examples at every grade level and every content area of teacher tasks that are aligned, partially aligned, or weakly aligned to the standard. So be sure to check that out and go and look at the support that is available to you.
And Carol, I think that this activity or these activities are really useful for us as classroom teachers, because sometimes we design a lesson and we think we've hit it all, but when you actually take the time, and there's a tool to analyze your task that's on that website also, so you can take older tasks of yours and do a real critical analysis to make sure that you don't need to revise to meet the rigor of the new standard, or to help you in revising to meet the rigor.
Right. And the thing about it is, we do a really good job with content and comprehension. Mm-hmm. It's knowing how far to go with the analysis, and multidimensionality has helped us mm-hmm. with that, knowing that that's the ultimate goal. That's where kids should be by the time they leave us. Mm-hmm. And we have to ensure that at points we give them that access to grade appropriate assignments. This concludes this video, and in the next video we will talk about some specific revisions to note that have taken place in the standards.